Hi, Mohan. Greetings. Thank you to Dr. Jayatunga for inviting me, and welcome to Sri Lanka, especially the foreign delegates. I hope you enjoy your stay here. It's a great privilege to talk to South Asian experts on this topic. Now, I'm not going to talk to you about details of climate change because you are experts on the subject, but I will try to give you the broader context of how climate and sustainability are interlinked, the role of this sustainable development goals, and of course something called the balanced inclusive green growth path, which will allow us to reach all these objectives together. Now, the first message is a positive one. I think we have the integrated solutions available to address both climate and sustainable development problems together. But we must build global momentum, as Dr. Jayatunga said, and find practical responses, implementation. There is no excuse for delay, as you all know. The IPCC's report last year on 1.5 degrees was very clear. 2020 is a make or break year, and it's just 1 year away, right? We need to bend that curve of emissions, and it doesn't look like it, but we'll try. Now, but there are a lot of other activities going on, and I want to commend you on this particular workshop, which is one of the many things that are going on. For example, last July I was in Portugal with President Obama, and we launched something called the Porto Protocol. 3,500 business leaders from Europe, top CEOs, pledged to act swiftly on climate change and sustainability. So there's quite a bit of interest and action. More close to home in Sri Lanka, also last year, we prepared a report called the Sustainable Sri Lanka Vision and Strategic Plan, which was presented to our president. And Sri Lanka is one of the first countries to produce such a strategic plan in compliance with the UN 2030 agenda. And climate change is an important chapter of that report. But I will explain later the importance is the linkages between climate and other development activities, which Dr. Jayatunga mentioned. So let me just touch on what are key IPCC findings. You already know this. We know that global warming is proven in spite of what Mr. Trump says, and it is human emissions that have disturbed the climate system. We know that continuing emissions will cause great and irreversible harm, and the poor will suffer most. This is very unfair because they have the least to do with causing the problem. And of course, the last is positive, that sustainable development is the effective way not only to solve the problem of poverty, but also to limit climate change. And so the whole movement, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals and so on, is to integrate climate adaptation and mitigation policies into an overall sustainable development strategy. Now, just to give you a little bit of geographic context, you all know this, but just to remind you, Sri Lanka is considered among the most vulnerable to climate impacts, number 2 or something like this. This is a preliminary assessment, I don't swear by it, but anyway, it's not a good message for us. So we have increasing temperature we have seen over the past 40 years above the global norm, increased frequency of extreme weather events and floods and droughts and rainfall variability, which is playing havoc not only with agriculture but also with hydroelectricity, and steady sea level rise and coastal vulnerability. Spatially, you will see that the red and orange areas are mainly in the northwest and in the dry zone. And these are generally the poor areas. So even in Sri Lanka, the poor are going to get hammered first. Right? And then, of course, areas and sectors. These are very quickly agriculture in the dry zone. Again, there are a number of things like destruction of crops, soil moisture, irrigation water, and so on. Vulnerable human habitats, both in the coastal areas because of sea level rise, in the hills because of landslides and other disasters. And then we have impacts on power, on transport, on water, coastal zones, tourism, forests, wildlife, and biodiversity. I won't go into details, but our ministry, I think, has done excellent work in finding the details. Now, let's talk a little bit about South Asia, because we share that with you, our neighbors. I think the annual temperature rise will continue, and we are facing the 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050, okay, which is not 2100 as we expected. And it may be more than 1.5 degrees if there is no mitigation. So these are some of the paths, but we are trying to find the lower path, the 1.5, not the 3.5, okay? On the World Vulnerability Index, you can see the red areas. Of course, Africa is pretty bad, but South Asia is not doing too well either, okay? We have diverse geography. We have glaciated northern parts. Indian subcontinent is badly affected and affecting human well-being, and of course, areas like health, agriculture, it will cause migration of people, productivity, and so on. So we have economic disruption, more flooding events, variability to agriculture, which is very bad for poor farmers, low productivity and water shortages, and of course heat-related and health problems. Now, going from South Asia to the global, we've seen this. I mean, we are well above 400 parts per million by volume now, and it's definitely in the unsafe area. The safe level was 280, which was a long time, okay, historically. And steadily, sea level rise has gone up. It's at least 1 degree or more. The temperature rise, sea level almost 2 centimeters. Precipitation patterns have changed, dry areas getting drier, wet areas are getting wetter, and of course more economic damage due to extreme weather events. This is happening now. If we project to the future, I mean, the best climate temperature rise we can hope for is 1.5, and even that I am pessimistic at the moment. Okay? Worst case, it could be considerably higher, okay, and more droughts and floods and extreme weather events. And of course, sea level rise, I mean, it's going to be at least half a meter or something, but that is delayed by 2100 because the sea level rises much more slowly. These are all, I mean, there's a whole range of variability on the models. You can see the polar bear looking very unhappy. All right. Now, let's put this thing together. This is a figure I did more than 15 years ago for the IPCC. It's still valid. You can see on the bottom right-hand side that it is our development paths that cause greenhouse gas emissions. So these are human-induced effects. That is the arrow that is driving the Earth's climate system through radiative forcing, and as the Star Wars says, the Empire Strikes Back. Climate system hits back at human and natural systems through temperature rise, sea level, and so on, precipitation. Right? So that the change in human and natural systems, the vulnerability, will affect our future development path. So you have a complete cycle, and this is a negative cycle because we are emitting more and more, we are having more climate stresses, more bad effects on our sustainable development. So what do? We have 2 filters. One is called adaptation, which you are talking about today. That is, we try to squeeze the stressors down so that the impacts will be lessened, particularly on the poor. But there's another filter at the bottom called mitigation. We are trying to also squeeze down the emissions. And if we do that successfully, we can limit climate change to 1.5, maybe 2 degrees, but we cannot eliminate it, right? So we have to live with it. And of course, the most desirable policies are to harmonize adaptation and mitigation with the Sustainable Development Strategy through, say, energy saving, growing forests, and so on. We know the small islands, polar areas, Asian megadeltas, particularly Bangladesh and those in sub-Saharan Africa, are the vulnerable regions, and many sectors and ecosystems. So we know where the vulnerabilities lie, and we know what needs to be done. But why is funding and progress so slow? Okay. That is the question we have to ask, particularly the people who have the money, and we have to press them. On the mitigation side, I mean, we are again failing, right? Because the 1992 Climate Convention, I have to write it, excellent document, failed to be implemented. We had the Kyoto Protocol, which had reduced targets, but again, because the USA did not participate, again, it was not a great success. We have the last chance. The Paris Agreement of 2015, I was there, and we are trying to achieve 1.5, but at least keep it below 2, right? Which means that greenhouse gas emissions, and according to the last IPCC report, must peak by 2020, which is next year. These are a little bit out of date because there have been subsequent COPs, but the bottom line is that post-Paris pledges are extremely weak, not enough, okay? My estimate and my colleagues, we are facing something like 3 degrees temperature rise if this trend continues. So something has to be done. And of course, funding for adaptation is very poor, okay? Much too poor to have the poor. So the best solution, as I said, is to have adaptation and mitigation which synergize with sustainable development. So there are many things we can do, but we need to get on with it. Now, let's get on to the broader context of sustainability, right? And to understand how it is linked with climate. There are major issues, right, as we all know. Resource shortages, food, energy, water continuing even now. Poverty and inequality, problems with the financial sector, which are still there, shocks and disasters, okay, conflicts, weak leadership at the global level, I must say. And climate change is considered the threat multiplier because it makes all the other problems worse. That is the problem with climate change. So if somebody tells you, oh, it doesn't matter, it's not another 20, 30 years. That's not the issue. The point is, even today, it is making everything else worse, right? So these problems are working together, but our responses, stakeholder response, is very uncoordinated. There are 7.5 billion people on the planet, all going their own way, right? There's no leadership at the top level, but I'm very happy to tell you that at the middle level, for example, mayors of cities, CEOs of companies are doing a lot more, right? And that is where we have to push. Poverty and hunger, this problem. 800 million people are hungry, mainly in Africa and Asia, South Asia in particular. China has actually had very good global results since the 1980s on poverty and hunger. There are 9 key global resource systems which are threatened. 4 of them, we are exceeding the dangerous limits already. Climate is, of course, one of them, but also biodiversity loss, biochemical flows like phosphorus and nitrogen, and land degradation. So we should be extremely careful, not only with climate, but with all these other resource systems as well. Just putting these things together, there is a concept called ecological footprint of humanity, which I have helped to work on. It is the sum total of ecological resources that we use, including the Earth's atmosphere. In 2012, we needed 150% of the Earth's ecological capacity to sustainably support our lifestyles. By 2030, if we continue along the same trajectory, we will need the equivalent of 2 planets to sustainably support us. So clearly, it is not going to be able to continue. Sri Lanka is also exceeding our ecological limit, and I feel that some of the other countries in the room are facing the same problem, right? Who is doing the consumption? Here inequality comes in. 85% of consumption is done by the top 20 percentile, let's say 1.5 billion people. They are consuming 60 or 70 times more than the bottom 1.5 billion. A huge gap. And 8 richest people in 2016 control more wealth than half the world's population. So inequality is rampant, right? Now, these 2 modules, panels are on the top, and you see what is happening at the bottom. When the rich are already using more than one planet, this is not only for climate, for all resources. We don't have enough resources to have the poor, right? So you have 70 or more years of unmet goals and broken promises. 1947 is the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If you read that document, everything in Agenda 2030 and the SDGs is already in that old document 70 years ago. So all these years we promised, but we haven't made very much progress, right? That is the sad truth, and that is why the Sustainable Development Goals are really a kind of last chance, and the Paris Agreement. So let's work on these. SDGs are universal and complete. They are supposed to be holistic, and very important, leave no one behind. So poverty and inequality has the prime place. And we have a global vision, a kind of world eco-civilization of the 21st century, on focusing maybe on things like happiness and well-being, not only material consumption. And I've worked even with the Kingdom of Bhutan on gross national happiness. So that concept has also emerged from South Asia, right? And we want to build a prosperous economy to help the poor, but socially we want to meet basic needs and to have inclusivity and peace, and environmentally we want to live within the biological capacity of the planet. Let me also tell you about some key concepts to move forward for the UN 2030 agenda. In 1992, more than 25 years ago, I presented a framework called Sustainomics and something called the Balanced Inclusive Green Growth Path, BIGG, right? The Sustainable Sri Lanka 2030 vision, the report I mentioned, uses these same core concepts. And these concepts have been taught and applied quite widely since then. So the first core concept is, of course, the triangle. That we have we need economic prosperity to help the poor, but we also need to protect the environment, and we need social inclusivity and reduction of inequality, right? So these are all important. What is important is not one or the other, but the balance between the three, right? And even when we address climate change, we have to keep these three in balance. The second core concept is called climbing the mountain, and this is what you and I should be doing. Empowerment. World leaders may or may not do anything, but you and I can do many things. It's like climbing a mountain. Even if the peak is covered with clouds, you take one step at a time, you'll reach the top, So you can plant a tree, you can switch off the light when you leave this room, turn off a tap. In your daily lives, you can do many things. And I'm glad to see that there are civil society organizations and others represented here who are living that and walking that path, right? So we need not only global action, but at the personal level, at the company level, the city level, and so on. Action from the bottom up. The third core concept, also very important, is what happens in our own minds. We have very unsustainable values at the moment, okay? And we need to replace them, starting from the youngest children, right? Those are the children who will inherit the planet of tomorrow. We need to think in terms of multidisciplinary analysis, because all these problems are not solved by engineering or economics or health, medicine or law, all of the above. We need to think in terms of global scales, not just local. We think in terms of decades or centuries, not days or months. And we need to pull in all the stakeholders to work together, right? We need to change the system. This is where values come in. And if you want to solve the problems of climate adaptation and mitigation, all the policies will not help if your value systems are wrong. We have greed, selfishness, corruption, injustice. This is all going on in the world today, right? That has led to what I call a model of economic maldevelopment, which are very well documented in the research I and others have done. We have unsustainable growth, which is based on debt, okay? Our ancestors, our grandparents saved a lot more than we did. Their savings, their investment is what is allowing us to live quite well. But what are we doing? We are not saving, we are borrowing from our grandchildren. So we have a very good life. But for the grandchildren, we have a huge environmental debt. And there are less resources, and because of the less resources, you have more conflicts, okay, more greed, and so on. And this cycle, it shrinks the sustainable development space. So we cannot survive, right? Clearly, what we need is to break this cycle, okay? And let me tell you, even there are no wars on weapons of mass destruction in the world. Every invasion or war has taken place because of resources. It's for oil, for land, for water, right? So this cycle has to be broken. The fourth concept is very simple. It's implementation. We have many plans, but unless we implement, nothing will happen. And this is where it's very important to get everybody working together, the empowerment. There are many success stories. We can share them. You are doing this through this meeting so that we can synergize, okay? We can use the examples of others. And we have the implementation triangle, which is that business and civil society have to work with government, because governments alone cannot do this. We can see that. And it's not enough to criticize the government, say, oh, they're all corrupt, they're bad. We have to push them in the right direction. And I'm glad to see that we have those organizations in this room today. In Sri Lanka, I formed an organization called Professional Implementation Network for Sustainability, which are pushing at the professional level to move the political agenda forward. Okay? We have also a key role of social capital. So civil society in particular, which is very much neglected, which is the embodiment of all the good values we have, they have a very important role to play. It's not just manufactured or economic capital, the roads and the bridges and the power plants. It's not only the natural capital, the trees, the land, the air and the water. It's the human beings that make a difference. And in South Asia in particular, you have very high population densities. We have to use our human resources and the social capital, mobilize them for this effort. Now, what about this BIGG part? Balanced, inclusive is socially inclusive, green is environmentally green, growth means economic growth. The three elements are balanced. Now, this is a model from climate which I presented maybe 20 years ago, but it's still valid. If you plot on the vertical axis, say the climate risk, which is per capita greenhouse gas emissions. On the horizontal axis is, of course, per capita income, economic. Now, if you're a poor country, you're at point A, which means you are poor, but your emissions are low. If you're a rich country, you're at point C, you are emitting above the safe limit, there is no doubt, but you're rich enough to maybe avoid some of the impacts. And many countries are in the middle, at point B. But here in this particular part, the triangle of economy, society, and environment is unbalanced, right, at the moment. Now, the first thing we need to do is to dematerialize, to transform particularly the OECD economies. This is very clear in the Climate Convention and so on. And some countries like Japan, for example, have done better. European Union, USA not doing much at all, just continuing along that path. Rebalancing economy and environment. There is another path. That is countries like us who are in the middle. We cannot afford to follow the same wasteful path of the rich countries because there are not enough resources or climate space on the planet for everybody, 7.5 billion people, to copy the lifestyle of North America. But we can reach the same point E by tunneling through. Why? Because we have many of the new technologies, innovations that can help us to do that. Again, by rebalancing economy and environment. So nobody is saying give up economic growth. We're just saying do it in a less resource intensive way. And then the last step, of course, is the BIGG, which is basically saying that it's not enough to have green growth, it must also be inclusive, it must be pro-poor. That is the BIGG part. It can be done. For example, on consumption, you have this rich family which is at the top, right? It is a European family. 1/3 of the world's food production is lost or wasted. In Europe and USA, it's like 30 to 50%. We can have less packaging and less wastage. The rich family can have the same lifestyle, but using much less resources. For the poor family at the bottom, it's a different story. We have to raise the amount of poverty. There is no question of reducing their consumption, but we can go along that tunnel, right, path. So that is one of the ways. On production, I've worked with some of the biggest companies in the world. Chemicals, supermarkets, retail, oil and gas, plantations, biotech, mining, and so on. Two things have come out in my discussions with the boards of directors and CEOs. One is sustainability and triple bottom line is the wave of the future. Some companies are very serious about it, others not so, but they all accept. And resource use efficiency is a win-win outcome. Everybody in the business sector accepts that. Because when you reduce, for example, energy use in your production, you're not only saving the environment, but you're reducing your costs and therefore improving your profits. It's a win-win outcome. Right? You can press very hard. And if we bring sustainable consumers and producers together, we can have a sustainable cycle which can spread through the whole society. I am particularly promoting online markets for youth because all the younger people under 40 or whatever, the millennials, they hardly do any physical shopping. Everything is online. We have sustainable markets for those people. And similarly, for traditional markets, you have organic markets and so on. But we have to build these sustainable societies if we want also a sustainable climate. Now, very quickly, let me finish up with the Sri Lanka 2030 vision. It's the first time a Sri Lankan president has asked 40 Sri Lankan scientists to write a comprehensive strategy. It was not a political manifesto. We try to be very practical, and it is an integrated document, and it uses this BIGG path, and we try to argue that we need to transform values, mindsets, institutions, and so on. Sustainable development goals prioritize to suit local needs, and so on. The vision is that we need a thriving economy with a high quality of life. So basically we are saying we don't want to be poor in the future. We want to be an Indian Ocean hub in Sri Lanka, right? But we want to have a green environment and live within our sustainable biocapacity. And we need an inclusive society, meeting the basic needs of everybody, and also ensuring peace and reconciliation. And we follow something called the middle path, which comes a little bit from Buddhism, and that is the BIGG path. Now, very quickly, what is unique about this document is the integration. The writers of the report made a great effort to integrate economic, environmental, and social factors. So very clearly, unsustainable economic growth can harm the environment and society, and every issue we looked into the interlinkages between the three. But that was not enough. We also looked at individual sectors, and then we looked at how these sectors are linked to the economy, the environment, and society, and what is the interlinkage among sectors. For example, transport, we know is very closely linked with food and agriculture, because you have to bring produce from the farms to the cities. It's linked with energy, because you need petroleum fuels for transport. It's linked with water resources, urban and physical planning. So all those linkages are looked at, and not enough. We also looked at some cross-cutting themes. Climate and air quality was one of the cross-cutting themes. It's a major chapter in our report. And again, we look at how it's linked with the economy, environment, and society. Also how it's linked with agriculture and food, with water, with poverty and inequality, gender. So climate is fully linked with all the other sectors and cross-cutting themes in our report. That is the unique factor. We need more work here on spatial integration, because we need to go from the level of central government to a level of provinces and local districts and so on, and that the ministries are working on, and through the Sustainable Development Goals mechanism, which you will hear about later, I think that is going to take place. Now, on climate, adaptation is number one in Sri Lanka, especially for the poor and vulnerable. Deforestation is linked because it aggravates disasters, floods, and so on, and land practices, land use. Education and awareness creation, and many innovative projects, and so on. There are many other recommendations, but it's an important chapter in our report. And we have recommended that climate projects and policy should be fully integrated with the rest of the economy, right? And we have tools for that, macroeconomic sectoral planning, environmental macro analysis, and so on, right? So the idea is to show decision makers that climate is an integral part of national development strategy. Unless you do that, you are ignored, right? And we have the models and the methods to do that. So let me, with the BIGG, we must work in an integrated way, not work in isolation, in silos. And bottom-up leadership and innovation is extremely important, not just relying on the top-down. And working together, I think we can create the 21st century global eco-civilization, solving climate and sustainability problems together. And I have great faith in our youth, who are future leaders. I'll just also give you something from a blessing from Sri Lanka, many hundreds of years old. It says, may the rains come in time, which is environment. May the harvest be bountiful, economic. May the people be happy and contented. May the king be righteous, which is social. So long ago, our ancestors knew about the triangle, the Sustainable Development Triangle. We are just trying to rediscover it today, right? My own institute does a lot of work on sustainability. Do get in touch. Dr. Jatunga has my coordinates. We give scholarships and we do research. We do training. This is one of the classes in China, almost 300 people. We have publications and also graduate level courses. Stuti, Nandri, thank you very much.